Alright guys, so for this video I just wanted to share the top five advices that I can think of to give to a beginner coder. Having been a beginner coder myself, I kind of uh, empathize and I relate to what it is that you're going through. A couple of things have been happening in my coding journey of recent. So for one, I am on the verge of finishing my master's degree in artificial intelligence. And I recently just started on a data science internship. So it's been a transitional period for me, right? So I went from being a hobby coder to being a coder in the university, just going through my degrees and everything, and then now I'm transitioning into the industry. So it's just kind of given me a perspective as to which pieces of advice that are really necessary, especially to make your transitioning from being a hobby coder or being a learner to being a person who executes code on an industry level. So I just wanted I just thought about this and I summarized the top five pieces of advice that I could come up with. I really hope that these are helpful for you. I also realize that some of these advices may seem a bit obvious to you, others might seem new. But I would recommend and encourage you to not fall for the bias that we have towards information that we hear again and again and again. So there is this concept in psychology which is called this familiarity bias. I don't know if you've heard of it. So what basically happens with familiarity bias is, let's say you hear a piece of advice for the first time. It's going to create a real impact for you and you're going to try to remember it. But let's say that you keep hearing those pieces of advice again and again and again. The impact of that advice is going to reduce for you over a period of time. So it's very important that we don't fall for the familiarity bias trap. We need to make sure that even though you may hear an advice again and again, it doesn't necessarily mean that that advice is any less valuable. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. The first piece of advice that I'd like to give you is practice documenting. And this must be an advice that you must have heard again and again in your university, in your independent coding journey, in your independent learning journey, whatever your path may have been. So what do I mean by practice documenting? So there are a couple of things that go into documenting. The obvious one, of course, is going to be to write comments, right? So write comments in your code. Always make sure to add comments in your code. That's a very common one that we hear of again and again. But there are some other practices in documenting that we don't often hear of. So for example, we don't hear about designing workflows. And this is something that was even new for me. So when I started on my internship recently, this is something that I came across myself. So I had heard of this a lot. I had somewhat of an idea that I had to do this in my job, but I had no idea how to do this or why it was so important. But as I got involved into a project that was very very vast and very tough to do for a person who was just getting started with using industry level code, with trying to understand it, I realized that designing workflows is extremely important. So I would highly recommend you Google this thing, maybe read a couple of articles on Medium, or maybe watch a couple of YouTube videos where they basically explain to you uh, how to design workflows, for your project, right? So that's a very important thing that I think is necessary to learn. And of course, write comments, right? So it's very important. The obvious reason for that is, if your program starts to become very long, you have many classes, you have many methods, what's going to happen is when you leave the code away, you close that window down, you leave that code for a little while, and you get involved in other projects, you're going to forget what that code was, why you had written it, what was the reason for it. So what's going to happen is when you go back to looking at that code for whatever reason, you're not going to be able to understand the methods that you have written yourself. So you're basically going to forget your own code and you'll have no idea what your own code does. So add comments, that's very necessary, and learn to design workflows. Okay, a couple more things that I can add is, maybe design algorithms as well. So this is also a good practice. And I'm not talking about algorithms as in, very, very professional level algorithms that have pseudocode and everything. That's not required. You can, just write down steps, right? So step one, here's what I'm going to do. Step two, here's what I'm going to do. So, you can just write down your algorithms in your own particular method that's comfortable for you. If you're good with writing pseudocode, that's really great. But if you're just getting started with algorithms and you don't have much idea, well, basically algorithms are just a procedure for executing a piece of code in order to achieve a task, and that's all it is. So maybe just jot it down somewhere, right? Before you start to program, just jot it down. What steps are required, what methodologies will you be using, what are the particular frameworks, just stuff like that. And yeah, I think that covers the first piece of advice. Let's move on to the second one now. So the second piece of advice would be focus. Let me just mark this second. Okay, focus on logic rather than syntax. So I don't know how many of you are aware of Linus Torvalds, but he's a pretty famous guy. He's the founder of Linux, one of the most famous. I think it is the greatest open source project in terms of the number of people that are involved in it. And Linux is just it's awesome. The operating system is just brilliant. And Linus Torvalds, the founder, I think it's his quote where he said, and I'm paraphrasing here. So I think he said, bad programmers focus on syntax, whereas good programmers focus on data structures. So what he basically meant by this is, try to focus on the logic that you're trying to apply in the program rather than just focusing on, making your code look pretty. So making your code look readable and easy is an important aspect, but some people, in focusing on making the code look pretty and easy, kind of forget about the logic that they're trying to apply. So for example, let's say you're writing a program and you feel the need to add a while loop in that program or to add a for loop in that program. Well, before you just go ahead and add that, think about it, right? So is the while loop really necessary? Or is there a better way to do this? Is there a way to reduce the time complexity of the program? And you really don't need to be a mathematician or someone who's really good with competitive programming and someone who knows a lot of data structures and stuff for this. That's not necessary. I think what's really necessary is to just have the required amount of sense and attention on your code, wherein you realize, okay, if this is the piece of code that I'm going to write, is it the most optimal code? If, let's say, 1,000 users or 10,000 users or 1,000,000 users are going to start using it all at once, will the system be able to process this code fast enough? Is there something that I can do better? And I can assure you that there is no way that you will be able to get the code right in the first attempt. So the first attempt is to just write the code down, right? It's very similar to how you would edit a book, right? So your first draft would be just for yourself, right? You just write down the first draft. It will be full of mistakes, typos, errors. There will be issues with the storyline, the script, the language construction, the sentence construction. Everything will be requiring an edit. So in the second iteration, you will edit the whole book. You'll reduce a lot of things down. You may even change a couple of chapters. You may add a couple of chapters. Then there's a third iteration and a fourth iteration until finally you have the finalized draft of the book that you then publish, right? So similarly, even with your code, don't just be satisfied with your first attempt at writing a program. Once you've written it down, then think about it. Read it again and again. Try to read it with a fresh mind, right? Just take a break for like half an hour, come back, look at the code again and see where you can make the optimizations. Think about the worst case scenario. What can possibly go wrong with your code? And then, just work your way through that. All right, moving on to the third piece of advice that I think is very important is practice with industry level code. Okay, so this is probably an advice that you don't hear much especially if you're a beginner. So for if you're a beginner, generally what people say is, go for the easy programs, try to apply something easy, try to build something easy. And that is all true. Yes, of course, if you want to understand a framework, if you want to really understand what is happening, with a with a piece of code, it's always better to take a very simple example or to take a very simple project and then focus on getting that stuff right. And yeah, that makes sense. But once you have a good grasp over the framework that you're using, once you have a good, even a basic level understanding of what a certain method or a certain built-in, method does for a program, what I would recommend to you is then look up code that has been published online on an industry level, so that you can then understand the implications of that code better, and then maybe just focus on getting the stuff right. Right. So what's going to happen is, let's go ahead and take an example for this as well. So let's say you are learning Android programming, right? You want to build an Android app. So go ahead and learn it from whatever means it is that you want to learn. But once you've learned the program, what you should be focusing on next is looking at other Android applications that are available on GitHub, and just downloading that repository, going through the code and seeing what they have done with their apps, and then maybe trying to make a couple of small updates to that. So what this will basically do is, it's a twofold benefit. So the first thing is, you will learn to read code written by other programmers, which is very, very important. You should not just be reading your own code, you should be reading other people's code, right? And second, you get to understand what you have learned on a deeper level, because you're seeing other people implement it in different ways. And this is a very, very important piece of skill, especially if you're a beginner who is going to soon start an internship or a job in this industry, and you're completely new to this industry. You're going to face a lot of hard time reading industry level code, and this is something that I can personally relate with. So I have faced this problem, right, with my own data science internship. I thought I had enough experience with data analytics and artificial intelligence and machine learning. But when I started this internship and I saw the actual industry level code and the industry level data sets that are being used, when I saw the real time data, it did definitely boggle my mind, and I had a rough time figuring things out. So it's great if you practice code on a daily level, but also make sure that in that practice you're trying to add a little bit of code from outside, especially if the code is industry level. That will be really great. So one advice that I can give you is go to GitHub, and you can try to find code repositories based on the following hashtag, right? So you can try to find it using this hashtag Hacktoberfest, right? And what you will find is that you'll find a lot of repositories with this hashtag Hacktoberfest that are actually very simple, and you can easily contribute to these repositories, because that's the focus of the repositories that have this hashtag in them. So just go ahead and search GitHub with this hashtag, and you're going to find a couple of easy repositories in your particular domain that you can then clone and then maybe contribute to, and that will just give you a little bit more confidence. Moving on to the fourth advice. So the fourth piece of advice that I would give you is, I think I've covered this point in the top already, but I'll just go ahead and write this again. So learn to test your code, right? So learning to test your code is exceptionally, exceptionally important. And this is an advice that is often very, very, very overlooked by beginners. How do I know that? Because I've been a beginner, and I have absolutely made this mistake many, many times. And I implore you not to make this mistake, right? When you write a piece of code, be, rest assured that that piece of code is definitely going to break when you try to launch it, into an app with real-time users, right? So a piece of advice that my boss gave me in my, in my internship, which is, which I found very valuable, is that if a door is open, somebody will definitely enter, right? So if there is something wrong with your code, if there is any issue in your code, that vulnerability will definitely come back to bite you at some point, right? There will definitely be an issue with the user. Your code might get hacked. There might be a security vulnerability that you might overlook. There might be an optimization mistake that you may make that can, then crash the entire system or crash the entire app. So you have to make sure that you test your code before you actually deploy it. So try multiple scenarios with your code and just get into the habit of doing that from the start. So let's say once again that let me just take the Android example once again. Let's say you're building an Android app, right? Don't just settle with the app by trying it one way. So for example, if you have an input field in that app where you want to take an integer value, well, don't just be happy by putting in the integer value and seeing the output. You should try a text value and see what goes wrong. You should try a Boolean value and see what goes wrong. You should try multiple values in that input, right? You should make sure that that input is vulnerability free, the code behind this is optimized, and it can handle the worst case scenarios. So learn to test your code again and again and again, and take your time with it. So a good rule of thumb is to measure the amount of time you spend coding and then simply double that and spend that time in testing. So if you've spent half an hour writing the piece of code, spend an hour testing it, right? That's very, very, very important. uh, okay, moving on to the final advice now. The final advice will be something which is more of a philosophy than an actual practical advice, but I think it definitely has implications in coding. So be brave. That's it. That's the final advice. Be brave. So what do I mean by be brave? What I mean is, and this is a mistake that once again, I used to make a lot. All of these mistakes are mistakes that I can totally empathize with, because I have made these mistakes again and again in my beginner journey as well. And these mistakes definitely, came back to bite me when I started off with my internship. So I just want you to, not make these same mistakes, and I just want to help you out in this, right? I just want you to understand these potential pitfalls and quickly recover from them while you still have the time in your hand. So if you're still learning, if you're an independent learner, if you're in your university getting a computer science degree, whatever it may be, I think all of these 5 advices are applicable to you. Anyway, so be brave. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm sure that you can relate to this this particular scenario if you're a beginner coder. So what happens is, let's say you have an idea of building something, right? And you go ahead and you select, for example, let's say Python, and you go ahead and start typing away the code. Eventually, you may come across a method, an inbuilt method, or a library that you will use, in which you will try to apply a method that you feel makes logical sense in using. And you run the code, and the code crashes. It doesn't make any sense. So what's the next best thing you do? You go to Stack Overflow, right? You go to Stack Overflow, you Google the issue, you look at the potential solutions that people have given. And over there, you're going to realize that somebody will, give you the exact solution for that problem and all you have to really do is just go ahead and copy paste that code from Stack Overflow or whatever website, and you just go ahead and you copy and paste that into your application, and bam, it just starts to work. It works like magic. So what we do is, generally at that time, we get afraid of the problem that we've been facing. We are too happy that the solution is working, and we are so happy that we simply basically avoid trying to understand why that solution worked instead of ours. So you were trying to do something similar, and the guy on Stack Overflow who got all those upvotes for getting the right answer, he was also trying to do something similar, but he got it right and you got it wrong. So why is that? I want you to be brave in this situation and try to investigate this. Try to investigate this. Be very careful, be very attentive, and just try to focus on comparing your code with his. If there are a couple of methods that he has used that you don't understand, Google it, read about it, try to understand why he has done what he has done. And I want you to be brave, and I want you to break your code as much as possible. So don't just try to focus on copy pasting code from outside, and just don't be satisfied with it working. Try to figure out why it is working. And in the process of that, you may realize that you're going to make a lot of errors, things are going to break, you're going to get frustrated. I just want you to be brave during those points, and I just want you to focus on the solutions, right? And this is often an advice that is overlooked. So many people have a in the software industry kind of have a bit of a disdain for people who copy paste code from Stack Overflow, right? I'm not one of those people. I'm not against Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow has saved my life more times than I can count. And even in my data science internship, I still refer to Stack Overflow again and again. I think I refer to Stack Overflow at least 25 to 30 times, when I'm programming on an average. So yeah, absolutely use Stack Overflow, look at other people's code, but then don't be too afraid to not see why your code was not working, and don't be too hasty to just simply copy paste the code and and get the job done. Just try to figure it out. Just spend some time and be brave with your code. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope this 5 bits of advice were helpful for you. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification button, and just let me know in the comments if such kind of videos were really helpful for you. That way I can try to focus on making more such videos. Anyway, thank you for watching and have a nice day.